Okay, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Jewel, if you could read the opening statement.
Yes, sir. Good morning, board staff and members of the public. After my statement, the chairman will open this meeting and explain the rules for this electronic meeting. Please keep your microphone on mute when you are not speaking. The technical support team may proactively mute participants if the microphone is picking up background noise. Board members should check to make sure the microphone is not muted before speaking. You may text me at 540-336-3948 at any time during the meeting if you need technical support, and an IT tech will call your cell phone to assist. I now turn the meeting over to Board Chairman Kobliss.
Thanks, Jewel. In accordance with the governor's state of emergency declaration and executive orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors Continuity Ordinance and General Assembly 2020 Budget Amendments 28 and 137, Loudoun Water will meet today in an electronic meeting. In compliance with these special procedures, only action items necessary to continue operations of Loudoun Water and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities will be discussed during today's meeting. Reports and other meeting information are available on board docs. Public notice and meeting access information was provided on the Loudoun Water website. A recording of the meeting will be available at this link. And then there's the link. Board members wishing to speak are reminded to press unmute and identify themselves by name so that staff can accurately capture comments. The board secretary will now take a roll call attendance of the board members.
Thank you. Mr. Allen?
Here.
Mr. Bonfils?
Here.
Mr. Byers? Mr. Byers? Mr. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. Kobliss?
Here.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Mr. Moody?
Here.
Ms. Sursakar?
Here.
And Mr. Sultan is not on yet. Thank you, sir.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved. Jim Bonfils.
Second, Sean.
Okay, if there isn't any discussion, Jewel, another roll call, please.
Yes, sir. Mr. Bonfils?
Here.
Mr. Byers? Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Ms. Sursakar?
Yes.
Mr. Sultan? Mr. Allen?
Yes.
And Mr. Kobliss?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thereby being no action items, we'll move into the presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. It's my pleasure to be here this morning and kick off this Broad Run Water Reclamation Facility wastewater workshop. So this morning, we want to step you through several important topic areas. Those include a brief history of our wastewater system, a refresher on the existing Broad Run Water Reclamation Facility, our latest flow projections, our waste load allocation, including efforts with DEQ and VAMWA. And then we want to look ahead to a phase 3 expansion, the timelines associated with that, and the path forward. And it's truly our goal to keep you informed as our board and poised to help lead us into the future. So in terms of our wastewater program, I like to think of it as a story. And when we look back on that story, I first arrive at this image of our Broad Run property here in the late 80s. And when we purchased that property, we had a clear vision for the future. And when we play that vision forward, really our mission statement resonates, that we work to ensure a healthy environment through effective and sustainable management of the resources entrusted to our care. And when we self-reflect on this, I think we all agree that it has truly been our effective and sustainable practices that have afforded us the success that we've enjoyed in terms of the facility that we have today. And so when we play that forward, we truly have a clear vision for the future with our wastewater program. And I want to pause here for a moment. So this image before you depicts the master planning efforts for the Broad Run property and in the context of the floodplain that encroaches on our property. And you can see here that, truly our master planning efforts utilize virtually all the buildable land over time on our property. And, this is important. These planning efforts have allowed us to, when we are approached by outside parties with development proposals on our property, we're able to fully understand managing wastewater flows for the county in perpetuity. We will be utilizing this land and we're positioned to know what those plans are. And so as we move along in our wastewater story and execute on this master plan, there are a few key themes that I wanted to highlight before we dive into the presentation today. And those include rapid dynamic growth. And just over the past 30 years, we've seen nearly a 500% increase in the population of our service area. The second main point is the interconnectedness. Our plant is located just upstream of the major drinking water intakes for the Washington metropolitan region. And truly, that's a portion of our drinking water through Fairfax. And lastly, that is advanced treatment. So it's our imperative to employ advanced technologies to protect the resources that I described a moment ago. And so this is all boiled down to a key practice for us, and that's been effective and sustainable planning. Notice those key words from our mission statement keep popping up. And when we look back across our history, this practice truly comes to life. From our inception, we've proactively managed wastewater capacity with DC Water through the Potomac Interceptor. And then moving through time with respect to Broad Run, the planning started for the facility well over 3 decades ago. Various studies in the 80s leading up to the purchase of the property, and then early entitlements work to allow for construction of the facility on the site. Getting into the late 90s and into the early 2000s, early piloting of the technologies that we would later employ there, design and construction of the facility in the early 2000s, and then leading into startup and commissioning in 2008, and then the recent master planning efforts and current expansion efforts underway. So it's been our continuous adaptive planning over time that's kept us nimble in this success story and within those themes of rapid growth, interconnectedness, and advanced technology. And it's in this same vein that we're now looking ahead to the phase 3 expansion. We want to remain sustainable and effective, and we know that these planning efforts for major expansion can take up to a decade. And I wanted to make one final thought. It's that, I think we're all in agreement that our collective water supply system and the Potomac Water Supply Program is also a great success story. And that timeline has similarly been riddled with a lot of sustainable and ongoing planning efforts over time to really lay a rock solid foundation for the future of water supply for our customers. Going back to our beginnings as a wholesaler, getting into well-crafted agreements with Fairfax Water to secure capacity, and then through the 90s and 2000s, laying the foundation for the Potomac Water Supply Program and the Quarry Water Banking. You can see where it's a similar theme of this effective and sustainable adaptive planning, so to speak. And so just want you to kind of keep that in mind and kind of round out this introduction with a few key takeaways. And that is, the wastewater flows are continuing to increase steadily, and they will continue on that trajectory with Metro and the development intensification, data center growth, and so forth. And we're continuing to track that and react. And secondly, again, the interconnectedness of our system, both physically and by permits. There's really, again, an imperative on us to protect the environment. And our permit, as we grow, our discharge limits approach those of drinking water quality. So that leads us into the advanced treatment technologies. And lastly, the again, the long history of visionary and adaptive long-term planning. So that really rounds out the key takeaways that I hope you will keep in mind today as we go through this presentation. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it off now to Kendra Sveum, and she currently serves as the plant manager of our Broad Run Water Reclamation Facility.
Kendra, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you first this morning about the technology and the work that we do right now at Broad Run. And so as questions come up, feel free to kind of raise your hand, interrupt if we want to chat or discuss about any of this. But our vision for Broad Run has been, very holistic. A lot of what Alton was saying, at the center of what we do is we are protecting the environment and the region's water supply. We take great responsibility in that and really look to do the best for wastewater, drinking water, everything together. But around that, there's so much more that we're constantly doing as we look and plan for our future in terms of, responsible financial leadership for our customers and our community helps build to serve overall community interests. And then we're always positioning to be a resource recovery facility, even more than we're currently doing. In addition to recovering water, we want to recover nutrients and energy, to continue our overall vision. So as Broad Run exists today, we have one of the most advanced wastewater treatment plants in the state. And for our size of plants of our size, we're really treating to lower treatment standards than anyone else. And so we've laid out here our overall process flow diagram for you of all the treatment technologies that we utilize. And so in general, we have the raw wastewater comes into the plant, and the first group of processes here are our preliminary treatment. This is where we're screening and settling to take out easily removable particulates. But where Broad Run really is advanced and the heart of our treatment process is in these middle, what we call secondary and tertiary treatment technologies. So we have biological reactor basins is where we grow our microbiology that handles the enhanced nutrient removal that we perform at the plant. And that is followed by our membrane bioreactors. And so what a membrane bioreactor is really doing is it's filtering out the biology so that we retain that in the plant, but also removing very fine particulate that carry contaminants and nutrients. And so our membranes filter all the wastewater that passes through our plant to 0.04 microns. This is beyond the size of many viruses. So even just with filtration, not only are we removing nutrients and particulates, but we are removing bacteria and viruses all in that step. So after secondary treatment at this facility, we then take off our reclaimed water supply. So we are well beyond our level 1 reclaimed water goal targets at that point, and also well beyond what most plants are doing in the state in terms of wastewater treatment. But due to this special location that Broad Run is at upstream of the Fairfax water drinking intake, we go further with our tertiary treatment processes. So we follow our membrane bioreactor with granular activated carbon. So these are technologies normally found in drinking water plants rather than wastewater plants, and it goes further in our removal. Now we're taking out trace organics and organic fractions of the nutrients that are completely soluble and typically just pass through normal secondary treatment. And then we do follow up with UV disinfection as another step in making sure that the water has been treated to the maximum possible before we go to our final effluent. On the biosolid side, we utilize anaerobic digesters, and this is a key process in our sustainable energy recovery. So all that microbiology that we produce, we digest it, and therefore that releases biogas. That biogas is a renewable energy source that we then use to heat the boilers within the plant. And so these, sustainable energy reuse are key to how we continue our operation. So the reason why we have these advanced technologies is because we're located in the Dulles area watershed. And so there is a specific policy controlling any wastewater treatment plant beyond DEQ standard regulations that is going to discharge in this shed. And that policy is written because our effluent is so close to the Fairfax water intake that they really consider us, and we are, a form of surface water augmentation. So this is true water reuse. And so we're meeting water reuse standards in the permit requirements that we've been given by the state. And so wanted to take a look at that just to illustrate the exceptional job that we've done since our inception and will continue to do moving forward. So what I've got here on the left is our current discharge permit standards. And on the right, I've just pulled another utility here in Northern Virginia for example. And so you've got this for reference, and we're not going to run through each of these constituents, but as you will see, we are lower in every constituent on the list than our neighboring utilities. But the key ones for today's discussion are total nitrogen and total phosphorus, because this is going to be a concern for us as we look at how do we expand the plant and continue to meet these limits. So right now, Broad Run has an annual average limit of a TN of 4. I think there's a question.
Yeah, I have total nitrogen. I know I haven't, this is the first I've seen of the total, however you pronounce that, nitrogen. How does that differ from
Yes.
total nitrogen?
Total Kjeldahl nitrogen is named after the man who invented the test. And so it's a different form of nitrogen. So total nitrogen, that's right, it's easy. It encompasses everything. So the major forms within total nitrogen are nitrate, ammonia, and organic nitrogen. The TKN is what we often refer to that so that it's easier to say, is just the ammonia and the organic nitrogen portion. So you subtract out the nitrate to get to that specific TKN. And TKN is a great monitor of aquatic health because it controls ammonia, ammonia being in that number. So in order to maintain a TKN of 1, which we have in our limit, ammonia has to be completely removed essentially at that point. It's a great question.
Okay,
Mr.
thanks.
Koblis?
Yeah, thanks. So, quick question. We had a water resources meeting about 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago. Time kind of moves in unbelievable speed. And they, Pam did a great presentation, and she talked about polyfluoral alcohol substances. Are they taken out someplace, or are they put back into the river, or just curious?
Absolutely. So PFAS is definitely a hot topic for wastewater treatment plants. And, to the benefit of how Broad Run is already set up, and I think it is a testament of how advanced we already are. The key technology that the industry is looking to remove PFAS is granular activated carbon. So the fact that we've already got that GAC process on there means that we are doing a level of PFAS removal prior to our discharge. PFAS gets incredibly complicated on the wastewater side because when it's present, it can change forms as it moves through the wastewater treatment plant. We can take really long PFAS chains that are hard to measure so they don't show up in our influent, break them down into shorter chains, which are easier to measure So there can be times where our effluent might look higher than our influent, but it's because we've transformed that PFAS just naturally occurring. Not that PFAS isn't naturally occurring, the process of breaking it down is natural in the bioreactor process, into something that's more easily measurable. So we're definitely studying this in Broad Run right now. Into evaluating performance of our GAC and what is going on there, but we are very well positioned for our effluent removal. The area where we really need to look going forward is it accumulates in the biosolids, right? So our major kind of outlook on that is, what do we do with what is in the biosolids? So that we can still land apply those solids. And so that'll definitely be a topic over the next couple of years on what treatment processes can best address that.
Thanks.
Great questions. So it's always fun when it's a discussion. And so you can see here at the numbers, we are currently permitted to an annual average, we should label that, of a TN of 4, where a neighboring utility could be at a TN of 8 right now. So we're at half the level of nitrogen discharge that they've been allowed. And then additionally, phosphorus is astounding, right? We are at a total phosphorus limit of 0.1, where this utility is at a total phosphorus of 2. So we are orders of magnitude higher in our nutrient removal levels, and it goes through all of the numbers. E. coli measures our level of disinfection, so it's even lower. So Broad Run has been held to a higher standard historically because of our location, and because of that, we put the right technologies in from the beginning, and the GAC is a great example of that because it's positioning us well for contaminants that are just now coming out. And it's why we're going to have to continue to do this exceptional level work and make sure that we're taking into consideration the processes that everyone around us are using as well. And so we want to transition now, unless there are any other questions about technology, into our projections of what we're looking for in the future. All right, well, I'm going to turn this initial discussion over to Darren Geldert, who is our Manager of Planning Programs, to talk about growth in the county.
Thanks, Kendra. So in order to maintain that kind of effective and sustainable planning that Elton was talking about, and this adaptive planning that we do, it's really critical that we have a long-term vision as we develop our planning projections related to our permits and to our loads and to our flows. That's the most direct that you can see. As Elton showed us, you know, this whole area is a really dynamically growing region. This growth is pushing us forward a lot faster than the rest of the state. So we're out in front, similar to our permits that Kendra was mentioning. And Loudoun County continues to be one of the fastest growing counties in the state and actually even in the country. So as we look forward, it's a bit of art, a bit of science, and we know that these projections of growth have both kind of lagged and exceeded the actual realized growth over time. So what do? Well, we lean on the county because they are responsible for growth projections, and this is a key that we have to follow. We follow their policy, so it's not really in our control. But we have to then take those numbers, those data, and make sure that we can transfer that into this sustainable approach that's the best for us and for the region. And this growth directly impacts the flows that go to Broad Run. So you've probably seen a map something like this before. You can see the large growth areas around Metro, just on the north side of the airport. There's also scattered throughout this data centers and other things. The one thing you might not realize is that even though this map looks pretty similar to something you may have seen a couple years ago, the data behind this shows that just in the past 5 years, the county has changed projections enough so that we now are projected to have 70,000 more people by 2045 than we were just 5 years ago. So there's definitely some uncertainty. Some of that is due to the change in our service area boundary too, with the addition of the TPA and the JLMA and some of the uncertainty up there. So we really watch this closely, but it also gives us that solid basis to project from. If we go to the next slide. So in that uncertainty, and as we look at the actual flow numbers that Kendra will talk about in a minute that come to our plant, there's a lot of things going on. There's the service area additions that we're still reviewing and are still a little bit in flux. Development patterns actually have been changing over time as we get toward more multifamily, more dense development. The data centers are certainly a different wrinkle that we didn't maybe anticipate 10 years ago. And they continue to just pop up everywhere. So that kind of changes a little bit of how the loads come to our plant, not just the volume, but what's in that flow. And then we're also looking ahead as we work with our neighbors and with the region to look at what might change in terms of climate science and all the agreements that we're going to have to work on because we are upstream of all these other water plants. And now I'm going to turn it right back to Kendra and let her talk a little bit more about the detailed flow projections at the plant.
Thanks, Darren. So definitely at Broad Run, we spend a lot of time looking at where our flows are going and what our treatment capacities are to make sure that we've got a handle on where we are today and where we need to be in the future. So Loudoun Water is amazing, and the amount of flexibility that we have that allows us to use different tools to meet the needs of our service area. And so I wanted to start with just this map because our wastewater treatment capacity is broken into 2 increments. So we have the agreement with DC Water of wastewater that we can send down the Potomac Interceptor, which travels through our service area in this general area, down to the Blue Plains Advanced Water Treatment Plant, wastewater treatment plant. And so this blue area right here is the portion of our service area that continually goes down to DC Water. The brown area is the area of flow that travels directly to Broad Run. Broad Run is located right in the middle of our kind of PI portion of our service area from the Potomac Interceptor. We've got this green portion down at the bottom, and this is our section that flows by gravity through Fairfax County down to UOSA. And so we have a 1 MGD agreement with UOSA, and then the capacity that we have by agreement with DC Water is 13.8 MGD. And in the last couple of years, this has been a big shift for us because previously this portion of the service area had been below that capacity. So this purple is kind of what we call our transitional flow. We have the ability to either send the flow from this area to Broad Run or to DC Water. So that in the past had all gone to DC Water because we were below our 13.8, but because of all of that development that Darren showed occurring down, in the Sterling area and around the airport, we've now met that capacity. So now in this transition area, we're bringing more of that flow into Broad Run and pretty much controlling that on a daily basis to maximize our 13.8 and treat the remainder where we are, because the Blue Plains plant has less stringent discharge permits than Broad Run. So and just due to its size, it is more cost effective, right, to treat flow down there. So we want to maximize everything that we have from that agreement. So when we look at our wastewater flows, we need to look at the total wastewater generated from this service area and then balance that out between Broad Run's capacity and our agreements with our neighboring utilities to get additional treatment capacity. So that's what we want to look at here. And this graph is a little different than graphs that have been shown in the past. So it is showing our total wastewater flow. And we've got 2 lines showing our combined treatment capacity. So UOSA and that small green area flow has been excluded from this discussion because there's not any control down there over being able to send more flow. It's a passive system. So if we take our current broad run capacity of 11 MGD, and I don't think I stated that previously, but we have 11 MGD right now. And the DC water 13.8, that puts us at about 25 MGD of total treatment. And the green, these are our monthly average total wastewater flows for the service area. And as you can see, it's highly dynamic, right? Because this is influenced by weather, water use, and multiple factors. So, in any given month, this was back in 2014, we could vary from 15 MGD of total wastewater to a couple of months later we were up at 19, right? That's 5 MGD difference. It's half the size of Broad Run in a couple of months of wastewater that's able to be generated, which really factors into what size we need to be as we move forward. And so what we've been monitoring as we monitor growth is we're always looking for how fast is this flow increasing. And so what we've got plotted here, this line is just a straight line average of the last 10 years and how fast flow has been increasing. It's about 0.6 MGD per year. And we can carry that projection forward and say, well, based on development patterns continuing as they are, just a simple statistical projection shows that by the year 2030, we're going to need maybe a total of 28 MGD treatment capacity if we continue at that rate. But what has happened is if we just look at the last 5 years, flows have started increasing faster. So the top line is just the average projection of the last 5 years to say, well, there definitely seems to have been a change. And what is key in this change is we finished up the planning for the 16.5 expansion, which we're doing right now at Broad Run, at the end of 2016. And so we were in a much slower growth period when that planning had ended. We hadn't really started seeing the next 5 years come on of higher growth rates. And so this is giving us, a wider window, and we look at this as, a projection. So is there a question?
Mr. Sultan has a question.
Yeah, I don't know if this is pertinent, but the Blue Plains is pretty vulnerable. It's right down low level next to the river. If that treatment gets interrupted, what do we have in the way of a way to account for it?
So if Blue Plains treatment was interrupted, Loudoun Water does not have a backup for the full 13.8. Broad Run could definitely treat to its maximum capacity, but Blue Plains is responsible for really developing their redundancy and reliability, which they've been doing as part of their long-term control plan. So they're in the process of building their deep tunnel network, which they're still expanding, that they use for Blue Plains serves the portion of Washington, D.C. that's very old, where they have combined sewers. So stormwater and separate all come together. And so the tunnels were originally built to serve just that, well, not to serve, but to alleviate the combined sewer overflows. However, our portion of the interceptor does tie into that deep tunnel. So it's a part of their infrastructure that we would have access to and that ability. So they would use their tunnels for storage. They have also built peak rate wet weather treatment ability. So if, say, they lost their secondary treatment, they have a high rate clarification system that's able to treat some of those wet weather flows. So their redundancy is definitely increasing as they laid out in their long-term control plan. However, this would be an overall regional problem, right? So Fairfax County and WSSC also contribute flows down there. So we would not be the only utility that would be impacted by that kind of outage. We also do emergency response planning simulations with Blue Plains, where we go through various failures, not really on their treatment plant, but even of the conveyance pipe going down. What happens if a portion of the PI does fail? Where would flow go? Who would we need to notify? So I feel like as a group, we're definitely looking at and kind of constantly evaluating what we can do in those circumstances.
I think that given their location and the increase in water levels, that one of these days they're going to have a flooding problem. But that's just my speculation. Okay, thank you.
And so another factor in these flow projections, so we've shown very simple, not simple, but they're useful, the straight line projections of if projections continue as they are. So we're also using more complex models that evaluate population projection, data center growth. It factors in climate change and how we think increased wet weather activity would impact these. And so those models we often lay on top of these more simple statistical models, and what they all show us is they're all lining up in this same window of because of all the uncertainty, we're never for sure where wastewater projections are going to be 10 years from now. But we're becoming more confident as we look at these flow projections in different ways that this lower and upper bound are a good planning range for this. And so what it's showing us is really by 2031, we're going to be looking at exceeding the capacity of the expansion already underway. So, once we get Broad Run to 16.5, we still have the 13.8 from DC Water. We're at about 30 MGD of total wastewater treatment capacity. And so by 2031, we need to be looking at getting more capacity online. And for an advanced facility like this, that does just take time. So in general, what we're looking at is starting this year in a 2-year planning period to decide what technologies we need to build and approximate sizing of what's required. It'll take 3 years to do the detailed design because we're really looking at new facilities in the area that Alton was showing, kind of north of our existing plant, and then 5 years of construction. So part of the challenges that we got in planning is it's 10 years. We have to build now or start planning now so that we can build in the next 10 years what we need to meet this demand window. And so that is part of the process that we're going to be talking about, is how we've prepared for where we are and then where we want to move moving forward. And so I want to switch topics, unless there are any other questions on the flow projections, into what we're looking at and our major kind of work to be done in establishing what we're going to build next. So one of the major challenges that we have is our waste load allocation. And I wanted to take some time to talk about what that allocation is. And so it's probably 1.5 years ago, we came to a board meeting and talked about the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Program and the Phase 3 WIP and the modifications that DEQ were talking about at the time. So this all factors into a lot of that. But just as a refresher, right, the Chesapeake Bay program is about protecting the entire watershed. So it involves multiple states that all contribute water down into the bay. And so each state has been given its own waste load allocation, and the states then divide that up as necessary. So what you end up with is, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, each are implementing slightly different programs, but all to meet the state's total waste load allocation. So Virginia has broken that down further into the various independent watersheds from the state that contribute to the bay. And so Broad Run is in the orange, so we're in the Potomac River watershed, and the Potomac Basin has its own waste load allocation that it's been given that is then divided up to all the wastewater treatment plants. So this is one general permit. So it's not technically covered in our VPDS permit that we looked at originally for our discharge. It's a permit that covers all wastewater treatment plants for the state, and there's one big table in that permit that lists each plant and how many pounds of TN and pounds of TP that a plant gets to discharge. So as we've been talking through this, right, we have flow projections, but load projections are the other concern that we look at, because as development changes and we get more low water use fixtures, the wastewater coming in becomes more concentrated. So, you know, when we look at flow projections, that's typically done assuming that, you know, those base constituents like COD and nitrogen and phosphorus are all at an average concentration. But if that concentration changes, we get more pounds in. And that's what the treatment really has to be based on, is can we remove each pound of phosphorus, and can we remove the pounds of nitrogen that we have entering the plant? And then that's the way our discharge is permitted for the bay, because the bay itself does really just care about the total pounds of nitrogen and phosphorus available in the bay for the biology in that location, causing the algal blooms and decreasing water quality there. So this program was put in place in you know, the early 2010s, and it was a large program to get into place. And so it was a big regulation to pass. Obviously, there were a lot of stakeholders with all the wastewater treatment plants, the NGOs involved, you know, DEQ, EPA. So the way the regulation was initially passed is there is no process to get additional waste load allocation. And this was acknowledged at the time, right? That's a hard issue to solve, and there was only so much that could be tackled to get the initial regulation off the ground. So essentially the can was kicked down the road. And Broad Run is now really one of the first wastewater treatment plants running into that limitation. We're expanding faster than any other plant in the state and running up against the limits of our waste load allocation. And so because our allocation was given on a number of pounds, and we don't have a process right now to get more pounds, as we discharge more flow, that drives the concentration of our effluent lower. And so this table is just illustrating the equivalent concentration that Broad Run's effluent needs to meet so that we remain within the pounds of discharge that we have right now. And so we were given our initial allocation based on our 11 MGD design capacity and a TN concentration of 4 and a TP of 0.1. So regulatory for the state of Virginia, the limit of technology for TN removal and TP removal is considered a TN of 3 and a TP of 0.18. So even from our inception, our TP effluent concentration was really considered beyond limits of technology and state of the art. Phosphorus was allocated, you know, really throughout Virginia on a TN of 4 basis, but the DEQ will be looking at any plant needing to expand of going to that limit technology in a TN of 3. And that's just as regulations stand right now. What is unique for Broad Run is where our waste load allocation takes us beyond that. So if after our expansion, when our actual wastewater flows start reaching 16.5, we would need to be at an equivalent total nitrogen concentration of 2.6, and phosphorus would be down at 0.067. So for the next expansion, you know, one of the first tasks that we will have, and we're calling that the phase 3 right now, is because we don't have a clear increment of that next expansion yet. So for phase 3, it could be, you know, building to 22. It may also be building to 30 MGD in order to get us ahead of this growth that the county is still going through. And so we would be looking at extremely low total nitrogen and total phosphorus limits in that case. With a total nitrogen of 1.46, right? There's definitely no other plants in the state of Virginia treating to that level. And even nationwide, there may be 1 or 2 treatment facilities really looking at a permitted effluent level at that. But everything in the red box is an unprecedented permitted treatment level for DEQ. And so, you know, this is what we really have to know in order to be able to select the technologies that we're going to build for phase 3, is working with DEQ in what do we do about the treatment levels that we're looking at, because as we illustrated in the beginning, we are already treating much further than most any other utility in the state, a lot farther than some. So taking Broad Run to these lower limits is really bringing us into beyond state of the art when there are definitely other places, because again, the goal of the Chesapeake Bay program is to balance overall discharges to the shed. And so while that looks scary in terms of the numbers, we have a great plan. So as part of the master planning that was done in 2016, a large nutrient management study was done that literally looked at the world of options in terms of what can we do to manage nutrients. Is there a way to remove them in the collection system? Is there a way, to look at, algae removal, just really advanced technologies that we can do? And it's given us a toolbox. And so while we work out with DEQ where we think that effluent requirement is going to go, we've got tools that we will use in the meantime. And so the reclaimed water system is an extremely valuable tool for this. So that is our method of, while we have flow coming in, we don't discharge all that flow back to the bay. So we're diverting not only the flow to our reclaimed water system, but those pounds of nutrients as well. And so in general, the flow that we send to those cooling systems, we only get about a third of that back. So it has reduced the water, concentrated the nutrients so that when it comes back into Broad Run, it's in a range that we can easily remove. And so that is a tool that that's going to help us going forward, and that will definitely pay off to maintain and continue to support that program due to the amount of offset that it can give us. In this is all just extending the time, right, until we get to the point where we're required to go to those lower levels. As we discussed, having additional treatment capacity with DC Water is extremely valuable, right? They have, a large mega plant. And so we are in discussions with them about any possibility to be able to get even temporary additional capacity from them. That is a complicated negotiation because it involves, as I mentioned, Fairfax County, WSSC, a lot of other municipalities that it's not as simple as just us asking and them granting that capacity, but it is definitely worth running down and making sure that we've got a plan. Nutrient trading is something that we can rely on in the short term, in terms of going to the exchange if we have a year that might push us to a lower effluent limit and buying some pounds from somebody else. Nutrient exchange is not our key solution to this because that exchange only looks 5 years into the future. There's no way for us to secure credits through the exchange that last us the full 10 years and beyond that we need to be able to account for our long-term treatment capacities. And then because this region is so interconnected, right, we have the agreements with UOSA and Fairfax County, and we're constantly in communication with them so that as we all work through our planning to evaluate any options. But really what is key for us, and we've been focusing on very heavily over the last year, is forging a way to change the regulations so that there is a pathway to get additional waste load allocation. And we feel very strongly about this one because it was acknowledged in the beginning as an issue that was going to need to be solved. And since Broad Run is really leading this charge, Loudoun Water will be one of the leading utilities to really push this through, but our goal is to have something that works right for the whole state. And so we wanted to give you a brief update on where we are in that process. So we started in November of 2020 with just approaching DEQ and having a meeting to make sure that they understood the issue that we had. We showed them similar flow projections and laid out those equivalent waste load concentrations and talked to them about what would be some options for us, and also gauging how open they were on this. And so it just so happens that in 2020 and 2021, that nutrient general permit was up for renewal. So we took that opportunity to submit a public comment to DEQ and also the State Water Control Board, really laying out this issue and illustrating that there is a deficiency in the regulations as they stand, not having a way to get additional allocation when it's needed, not for backsliding or reduced treatment, but just to accommodate growth. And so in Carla's board comments at the March board meeting, we laid out there that we would submit this comment as just during the public comment period on that renewal and kind of see what happens from there. So in this month, we did get a response back from DEQ. It was in the agenda for the State Water Control Board meeting, and it was very favorable. So one, our entire comment was included in that agenda, which was very exciting because in that we did lay it out some proposed framework that they could consider for a way to modify that regulation. And DEQ, we had a feeling this was coming, that they essentially deferred our comment and said that that regulatory action to just renew the permit wasn't the correct place to make this large of a change to the regulation. And they encouraged us to really submit our own petition to amend the regulation. And so that's what we're looking at as a path forward. Is one, we want to communicate with all of the stakeholders that are involved in this. So it's definitely beyond Loudoun Water, right? There are other utilities that will be looking at expanding, even if it's further down the road. So getting a statewide framework that is suitable for everyone, also getting people like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and other organizations involved with the Bay involved to get support for the regulation, and then going forward and officially petitioning the state to amend that regulation. But it's all timing on this because that rulemaking process that would then be initiated could take 1 to 2 years to actually get through all the public reviews and legal processes that it has to go through. So in general, it is imperative that we keep pushing on this so that Broad Run isn't pushed to levels of advanced treatment that just can't be reached with wastewater technologies. And that we get a process in to do this, but they're going to have to go at the same time, right? So we showed the schedule that says we've got to move forward on planning and design of the next expansion while we're doing this regulatory work. And that's where Toolbox comes in, of making sure we're prepared for those outcomes while we push to get this process started. So that is the end of my portion. Any questions? All right. Well, from here, I think I'm going to turn it over to Sarah from Capital Planning.
Thanks, Kendra. All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the Phase 3 expansion. And I think the best place to start really is to start by looking back to understand where we are in order to talk about the future and where we're going. So, back in 2014, we embarked on a long-term visionary master plan for the Broad Run facility. And we really took all of these world of options, right? What could flow projections be? What could regulations be? What are all these potentials? And we looked out for a 50-year period to try to understand where we might be going. And then we backed into a near-term plan and time frame where there was more certainty, right? As Kendra was pointing on the flow projections, we started to have a window where there's confidence. And so what we're talking about with this Phase 3 expansion, as we're calling it, is within that 20-year window. And we're going to leverage some tools that we developed as part of the master plan. So you can see down here, we developed a series of roadmaps for various areas. So liquids treatment, solids treatment, reclaimed water, and others. And really, we we wanted a visual representation and a living tool to help us as we navigated moving into the future. So we also wanted a tool where, as we make decisions, we want those decisions to dovetail and to fit into what could happen. And this is that adaptive planning that Alton was talking about. So one of the valuable things that Alton also mentioned was, looking really far out. What did we gain in the master plan? And one of the really valuable things that we understood was that we're using, right, that the land that we have will be used in the future based on what we think is in the world of possibilities. So that was valuable for us. And I think too, as you fast forward, this graphic here shows the phase 1. So the original plant construction, which was 11 MGD, as Kendra mentioned, along with major upgrades that we did at the plant leading up to phase 2, which is the current expansion project. So you can see we built a lot of infrastructure initially, but since then, since the plant was commissioned in 2008, we've had a lot of different projects at the plant. We're operating facilities, so naturally we have needs, and we've identified other opportunities, things like the reclaimed water pump station you see over here and storage tanks. That was not something that was constructed with the original facility, but there was a great opportunity for us, and so that project was constructed. But the facility has continued to evolve, and we've learned a lot as we've operated it. As we moved into this phase 2 project, this list of considerations, right? Service area additions, the JLMA, changes in development patterns, and the growth in data centers, and some of these other things. There's a lot of uncertainty, and ultimately what that really pointed us to as we were coming out of the master plan and realizing, yes, we do need additional capacity. How do we go about doing that? And we really decided to take an approach to do more with less. And what that meant for us was to leverage the assets that we had already invested in. So the heart of the plant, this picture here is one of the modules of the MBRs, the membranes. We looked at that technology and really trying to understand, hey, what can we do to that system that's going to squeeze more capacity out of it so that we're not actually having to make the investment in more concrete? What can we do and learn about our granular activated carbon system so that we can squeeze more capacity out of it? And what we learned through that is that some of the original design criteria that were used to size the facility, as we'd operated it over the years, we learned that there was some juice for squeezing, if you will. And so we took an approach to build a project, which were our phase 2 expansion project. This is the aerial of the facility. This is the project that is currently under construction. This takes us from 11 MGD to 16.5 MGD. What you see here in blue is new concrete tanks. And what you see in green is modifications that we are making to existing processes in order to get that additional 5 MGD of capacity. As we went along and the phase 2 project, we really started to look at other broad run projects that we had out there. So, we have a really robust asset management program, and that program really helps to inform projects that need to be conducted over time based on useful life and things like that. It's an operating facility that is just part of running a facility. You have equipment and you have renewals and things like that that need to take place. We folded some of those projects into the phase 2 expansion project, and there was additional value for us, cost efficiencies that could be gained by doing that. Naturally, there were some other capital projects that had been identified over the previous years, kind of consistent or predated even in some cases, the expansion design. And as we started to really look at what the project was and the timing for these other projects, again, we were very flexible and nimble and realized the benefit that we could gain by incorporating some of these other projects into our expansion project. So I think what I'm describing here is the approach that we take as we navigate a project. We're constantly feeding data and understanding what else is going on related to facilities to help us build and get the best project that's going to also have the most cost efficiency for us. So I want to talk a little bit about cost here. What you see in this graph is on the left-hand side, you see a metric which is cost per MGD of treatment capacity. So this is a metric commonly used in the industry. And what you see here is in 2008 dollars, which was when the original plant was constructed, you can see that we paid just over $20 million per MGD of treatment capacity. If you escalate that to current dollars, we're just over $30 million per MGD of treatment capacity for the original plant construction. That's a greenfield site, so there was nothing there. We were building all the tanks and everything else. As we moved into this phase 2 project and are looking at doing more with the infrastructure that we have, this is not a surprise that we gained some real cost efficiencies in that we added 5 MGD of treatment capacity and we paid just about $20 million per MGD of treatment capacity. And all of these bars are both construction and design costs associated with them. As we're moving forward to the phase 3 project, we don't anticipate that we're going to get the same efficiency as what we're getting in the phase 2, but it'll probably be closer to phase 1 because, as Kendra mentioned, we have to build new tanks, new concrete, potentially some new processes as we understand what limits we're meeting to. So, this is something that we are very closely trying to understand. Financial responsibility is very important. So we're keeping our thumb on that pulse. We're going to have to make some pretty big decisions as we move into the phase 3 expansion. Kendra also touched on this, that, the first thing that we really need to understand is how much of an expansion are we making. We want to accommodate growth. We want to make a smart decision so that we're not up against the wall on the outer years. But we also want to continue to make good use of the process technology selections that we've made thus far. So we're going to use the tools that we have developed to make decisions. We know that there are some big ones for us. Biosolids treatment technology is a big one. There's some additional considerations, PFAS treatment, for example, and some of these other things that we're going to need to evaluate. And that's going to be in the first part of our planning phase for the phase 3 expansion. We're going to also take a similar approach to what we did before. So we're going to really keep, trying to understand, hey, are there interim opportunities here? Things that that might make sense to peel out early or package separately that give us some additional benefit. There has to be drivers that really make sense. But we're also going to look at what continues to come out of the asset management program. And similarly, as time goes on and we may identify changes in regulations or code or other things like that, what is coming out of the capital planning, what's going into our CIP that makes sense to roll into this project as well. We recognize that we can't do this alone. Excuse me. sorry about that. So we realized that we can't do this alone. So looking back last year, we put out an RFP for professional engineering services, realizing that this project was coming out. So we went through a procurement process. This is very similar. This is the same process, actually, that we went through for the original plant construction, as well as for the master plan and phase 2 project. And we had a team, similarly as what you've heard from other procurements. We had a team of people that were represented across the organization, and went through a process where we received proposals from engineering firms. We shortlisted firms and conducted interviews and ultimately selected a consultant. So right now we are negotiating a scope for the next project. I want to mention briefly, excuse me. I want to mention briefly that, this is something that has been in our CIP. So looking forward for the phase 3 project, we knew that this was coming, and so we have budgeted for it. So we've shown about $120 million through 2030 for this project. Depending upon, how things unfold, it's potential that the project will extend beyond 2030. But financially, we feel like we're in a good position and we have planned for this. And as we learn more information, we'll continue to incorporate that into our capital improvement plan. All right, so a little bit on timelines. So we have the current construction project right now. So that's showing that is going through the end of 2024. I think substantial completion is February of 2024, and it should be wrapped up by the fall of 2024. As Kendra mentioned, we have this ongoing work related to modifying the regulation around waste load allocation. And then we have the phase 3 project. This is laid out as a traditional delivery, so design, bid, build. Again, consistent with our adaptive planning approach, we're going to understand if, as we go into planning and things make sense for us for some type of alternative delivery, we can consider that. But right now, just to be conservative, we feel like even if we lay things out in a traditional delivery pattern, that we comfortably can meet and have capacity online coming from the phase 3 project if we move through in this manner. So we're looking at about a 2-year planning period, 3-year design, and then construction to follow on from that. So again, as we learn things through this regulation modification process, things can kind of but we feel like we're well positioned. So the path forward and what you can look to see from the board perspective is that, as I mentioned, we've got a professional services contract that we'd like to bring to you. We would bring a contract and an initial planning scope to the August CIP, and we feel like we're well positioned for that. We're going to continue to bring forward information on the regulation modification related to the waste load allocation. So you will see that as well. And then wanted to just touch on here at the end, this is the last slide, some of these other topics and things that we bring forward to you. We've got a robust research program. And so we might come to you and share some information on the research program, but understand that once you dig into what's really happening as part of these, that there are various projects where the goal is specifically to gain information to inform what we're doing at Broad Run. So regardless who in the organization is leading any of these particular efforts, we're really, really well integrated and connected. to be able to feed back into a Broad Run Phase 3 project, and think that ultimately that's going to really help us to identify the best project that we can build. So I think with that, that was all the information that we had to share today. Happy to have any discussion about anything that has been shared up until this point. Mr. Kobelis.
Yeah, I don't really have a question. I just want to say this is great. I mean, it's a great presentation by all of you, Kendra and Sarah and Alton. So it's very informative. Looks like we got a lot to do in a short amount of time, that's for sure. Looks like Marty has his hand up.
I just wanted to say that it was an excellent presentation, very informative. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
I like seeing Roddy there. We're not going to be able to see that presentation there very often in the future.
They're you know, we can have him come for public presentations. You know, he can sit in the audience.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
I'll still be an interested citizen.
I suspect so.
All right, if there, go ahead.
I got
Brent,
one question,
yeah.
Mark. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I didn't raise my hand. I'm looking at all these buttons. You guys mentioned the PFAS. Is there any technology that you're aware of at the moment that would be interesting to explore on the solid side, or is that also sort of beyond current technical limits?
So it's definitely something that we are keeping track of, and it really is in advanced oxidation processes where we would take our biosolids, dry them, and then oxidize them further to try to get rid of that PFAS. And so this is still on the verge of development. There is one full-scale facility that I know of in the United States that we are keeping tabs on. So it's in like the roadmaps that Sarah has shown, we have one for biosolids that really walks us through the alternatives to get to that end point. But it's not something that we can quickly get to, right? There's still a lot of development that needs to go on to get there.
So it sounds like that's probably not going to be ready to go in a timeline that would correspond with this phase 3.
So we may not get all the way there. The goal would be to position to get as far as we can, so that can be put on in a much smaller project, maybe when it was ready. But we always keep our eye on the regulations, right? To be prepared of what that roadmap is going to be if something does come down the line into a PFAS limit for biosolids land application.
Okay, great. And then one final question. You mentioned, I know you guys have looked at this, but so the Potomac Interceptor has a problem, a pipe breaks, something happens. What do we do in that event when we can't send essentially half our sewage down to Blue Plains? What are we doing?
Yeah, so say the Potomac Interceptor does break. We have no ability to stop the flow from going there. It's this kind of switch in paradox from drinking water to wastewater. Like, we can't turn the wastewater off. So it becomes a spill response situation then, in terms of, okay, all of our wastewater is still going there as long as the same as Fairfax and WSSC. So there's a team of people from all the organizations that get into spill containment. Bypass pumping is really the major tool that they're going to rely on, is try to get pumps to bypass wherever the break is to the nearest location. And because it's DC, right, and the last emergency response group we went through, right, I mean, it goes very high levels within the government start getting involved in that spill response. But from our point of view, our wastewater just keeps going there.
Okay. And is there, would there be something where we could say, here's a low-lying area, or here's a tank, or here's a quarry, or something like this, where you go, if we really had to, we could pump the stuff there and have it be contained for some period of time until the systems were back up and running, as opposed to it just leaking out into the Potomac or what have you?
You know, absolutely. So that is something, because we are such an interconnected community. We do look at, and particularly in the area where we have constructed BRIPI, which is the Broad Run Interceptor parallel to the PI, we would look at, you know, pumping over to BRIPI as much as we could take to get that water. It's also something we're in discussion with DC Water. With our new EQ tanks going online, we're really expanding the amount of water that Broad Run can store. So in that situation, we would all start storing as much as we physically could to help the problem.
What would we be able to store with the new EQ tanks?
Right. So right now we have 2 5 million gallon tanks, and we're constructing a new 10 million gallon, right? So in some emergency event like that, we would be able to fill up as much as possible and hold a possible 20. Now, you know, normal PI flows are in the 100 million gallons range. So we would, you know, just be scratching the surface, but it's as much as we could do. And I think Northern Virginia is amazing in the way that the utilities do work together like that, where we all just do as much as we can.
I think it's also, Mr. Campbell, probably, you know, if you look at what the site plan is in the future, there's additional EQ definitely in our future. And we've already decided, again, you know, just the whole approach on just be prepared, right? We've already started, there's some land use processes that we have to go through in order to make sure that in order to build any future EQ tanks. And we've already pulled the trigger on that to go ahead and to get those approvals. So if we determine that, you know, hey, this risk is too great for us, or we feel like it's time to move forward with something like that, we can be very nimble and flexible, and we're not tied up in a land use process that's gonna really restrict our ability to do what we want to do.
Well, it sounds like, based on what you guys said, that EQ tanks are just going to be too small to make much of a difference with those kinds of flows. So I'm remembering back to like the Beaver Dam Reservoir when it was just a creek and topography, and I go, okay, is there something like that somewhere around where we could have a place that it could hold, or again, one of these quarries or something, and it's at least better than having it leak out into the full environment. I don't know. I know that it's probably off the wall, but.
Well, it does kind of align with the program that they have in place now for managing CSOs with the tunnel network. So solutions like that, you know, again, it just a lot depends on where a failure might occur, and then what tools are available upstream from that to mitigate. And so there are scenarios where the storage capacity we have available at Broad Run could be a part of a solution to mitigate a spill, and certainly reduce the spill. Again, depending on where that occurs and how much volume we're talking about, because it's hundreds of millions further down, but it's, you know, tens of millions closer to us, and so you know, there are a lot of, I think it's never going to be a one size fits all solution. It is you know, you have to kind of slice it a little bit and figure out what are the best tools for a given scenario. And that's what these exercises we undergo with the region are all about, is trying to look at those scenarios and figure out what the mitigation strategies would be.
That's great. Well, thank you all again for the presentation. Really, really a lot of work that went into this, obviously, and so thank you.
I have a question. I thought I heard you say that the reclaimed water that goes to the data centers, that certain nutrients are removed through the data centers and comes back different than what went in there. I'm just curious what the mechanism is, or what nutrients are removed at the data center. I'm not sure if that's what I heard.
Absolutely. So they are just concentrating the flow. So when they use it for cooling, the water evaporates. So that nutrient just comes back at a higher concentration for us than when we sent it, but is good because at the higher concentrations, it's easier to remove. So they're just a concentrating effect on the nutrients that are already there.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. Great presentation. Really helpful. I want to follow up on Brent's question. I had a similar question, but just to follow up on his question, are there ongoing inspections of the Potomac Interceptor by the different authorities along the way to ensure that its integrity and so forth, and space for replacements if they're needed and upgrades? And then Blue Plains itself, just a question on that, as they're expanding their capacity and so forth, are we contributing to the cost of that project? Thank you.
And Mr. Kelly, perhaps I can answer the first part of your question there. That DC does have a rigorous program ongoing for rehabilitating the Potomac Interceptor, and it's actually the approach they've taken is it's really asset management. They're looking to the most cost-effective rehabilitation measures for the given scenario that they identify, and they have a great prioritization process in place for that. So that work is ongoing, and we've even been a participant in that in the past, as we actually at one point in time allowed them to bypass the flow around the work site for rehab in our BRIPI pipeline before that went online a few years ago. So that was a really novel approach to that. And then they are underway with a full modeling effort of the PI that we're a participant in, that's looking to mitigate the effects of wet weather flows and get the great handle on the flows from all the contributors to the Potomac Interceptor, and then look at problem areas, and then how to best, again, to the last conversation we were having, what is the best collaborative approach to mitigating areas where we see constraints on flow.
Okay. Thank you, Alton.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then just on Blue Plains, as the expansion goes on, do we contribute to the cost of that?
Right, and so with the PI rehabilitation in Blue Plains, that's part of the capital contribution that we make to DC Water.
Okay, all right, great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Ms. Sursakar? You're muted, Ms. Sursakar, sorry.
Sorry about that. I don't have a question, but I just want to take a moment as a board member to actually applaud on such a wonderful, in-depth, detailed presentation. To all of you that presented, and to all the team members who put in significant amount of work to get to this presentation. So I know a lot of work goes inside, and we may not need all the folks that indirectly or directly offered the presentation and the details and the work in the presentation. So please offer my humble thank you to all that presented and to all the team members that worked on this presentation. It's, as I said, it's one of the best. So thank you.
Okay, if there's no more comments, I don't think we need to really vote to adjourn, but again, I thank everyone for presenting. It was very informative, and I appreciate it, and I hope everybody has a great rest of the week, and I look forward to seeing everybody in person in September. I'll have a detailed explanation about that in the July board meeting. Jonathan, are you still on? No.
Yep,
oh,
I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, one of the questions we had was whether, and I don't know if you've told Carl already, whether the calendar year for the 2-meeting minimum is over at the end of this year, or whether it starts in September. Do you know offhand?
Yeah, so the limitations on the participation would commence once the continuity of government ordinance that the county adopted expires, and that would be in September, so that then you'd have the opportunity or the ability to have up to 2 meetings, that a board member could elect to attend remotely through December 31st of this year.
Okay.
And then the clock would restart in January. But I want to stress that in order for the board to meet after that ordinance expires, you must have a quorum of the membership physically present in the meeting room. So only you know, 4 members in theory at any one meeting could attend remotely. The 5-member quorum would have to be physically present.
Okay, I just wanted to just quickly bring that up. I know this isn't quite the forum, but I wanted people to start preparing for that in September. All right, with that, let's adjourn, and thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great 4th of July.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Presentation.
Thanks. Bye.